Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge cycling podcast presented by Zwift, the online cycling platform that makes training fun. More on them and Paris-Roubaix in a minute. Paris-Roubaix preview men and women's edition. It's a bit later compared to the other monument previews, Flanders and San Remo. The reason for that is I refuse to be burned a third time. Fool me once, fool me twice, I was an idiot, and now I'm not going to be an idiot the third time with the Paris-Roubaix preview. I was not doing it before the Jumbo-Visma Wout van Aert participation announcement, which we'll discuss in a second as well. But he's in, and so we are cleared for liftoff. But we'll kick off with the men's previews from Compiègne to Roubaix, 257 kilometers, 31 cobbled sectors. They have an open, flat, non-cobbled first 95 kilometers before they hit the Trouville Inchy. I struggle with these ones a lot. It's like weird French. It's near the Belgian border. It's really tough for me. Anyway, 31 cobbled sectors. They vary between 3, 4, 5, some less in terms of star rating. The big ones are often Trouet d'Arenberg, the Havre-Louis-Wallers before that, also Canfin, Pavel, and Carrefour de l'Arbre are pretty big ones as well as Mont-Saint-Pavel is a big one at 50 Ks to go. Last year was wet. This year it isn't. What do you think, Benji? How do you think it going back? Like, is last year an anomaly? Do you expect to see a peloton of 30, 25 riders entering Arenberg with 100 Ks to go like we saw last year in the wet conditions?
I think it's certainly an anomaly when you compare it to the other Roubaix surrounding that, the dry Roubaix, because we've got a big difference between a wet Roubaix and a dry Roubaix. Also, when it comes to the fandom, people like a rainy Roubaix. But when it comes to the difference there is, you mentioned it, the riders going into Trouet d'Arenberg, sector 20 on the parkour with roughly 100k to go. That is where we see a big difference between those editions. The dry editions have a peloton of like 50 to 70 riders still before Trouet d'Arenberg, if not more. And then we look at the dry Roubaix of last year, the rainy Roubaix of last year, and it was very limited to 15 riders, 20 riders, not more than that. So that's a big difference. And it also makes a very different race because once you get to Trouet d'Arenberg, it's only the favorites left last year. In other years, there's domestiques there and so forth. So I think there's a big difference there. But obviously, if a crash happens before Trouet d'Arenberg and there's 20 people left, that might have the same effect. But on paper, without a serious crash before that point of the race, we should have a larger peloton than last year, and therefore not necessarily have the race open up that early as last year, because I swear, people were attacking with 150k to go last year.
Normally, in the dry conditions, the first 50 Ks of cobbles, there are not huge decisive splits. I was about to say GC action, but action from the big guns. In the race, it really opens up after Arenberg in the last 100 Ks to go, and then it's pretty much anything could happen. Any cobbled sector, someone could crash or someone could attack. And we can't rule out attacks this year before Arenberg or on Arenberg. There is, after all, NVDP on the start line, but I still think it's unlikely that sort of thing happens. As you know, they finish in the Velodrome. 7 of the last 10 years or so have been a sprint of some description, with notable solos being Bonin and Terpstra. I think Bonin was he solo? You'll know better than me in 2012, Benji.
Yeah, certainly a 52-kilometer solo.
Okay.
So crazy stuff.
Pretty
kind
good.
of Ambala style when it comes to his Warzone Vlaanderen win, but in a race that actually matters, which is Paris-Roubaix. But I do think that most of the editions, like you said, were sprints, and I think that it's intriguing because it's always so stressful when the riders go with multiple riders into the Velodrome. It's something that always keeps me so hyped. And when it's a solo victory, the Velodrome is a bit less special to me. So I won the sprint at the end of Roubaix.
Yeah, I agree. Even if it's what looks like a foregone conclusion like Dillier and Sagan, it's still exciting nonetheless. There's that tension to the line. Before we get into the top favourites by the betting markets, at least, a word on our show partner, Zwift. Zwift are the title sponsor of Paris-Roubaix Femme avec Zwift, but they're also this year the title sponsor of the Tour de France Femme for the next 4 years. On Saturday for the Paris-Roubaix Femme avec Zwift, it marks 100 days until the start of the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift, and Zwift are calling on, and we are as well, evidently, calling on fans to watch the Femme race as the women's peloton takes on the TDF for the first time in decades. For more information on how Zwift are working to grow a stronger and more inclusive community, or to dive in and start riding with a free 7-day trial, head to Zwift.com through the link in the description down below. I can't wait for that Tour de France Femme race, particularly the Chemin Blanc or whatever, the White Road stage. But more on that in due course. The top favourites in Paris-Roubaix, the men's race, Benji, MVP. He's edged ahead of Pedersen, but Pedersen's right there. MVP's $4.25. Pedersen's $4.50. And Van Aert, who's been announced, is third favourite on 8. Asgreen fourth at 13, and Laporte on 13 as well. And they're the 5 favourites I really see. Are you surprised Pedersen is so short? Compared to Flanders, you would never give him equal footing with MVP. They're basically given the same chance by the market.
I'm not really surprised that he's that high when it comes to like favoritism in this race. I personally was considering putting him next to Van der Poel as a favorite for this race, but I'm in doubt of that since his crash recently in Circuit Sard. But I've learned from MSR, Milano Sanremo, that we shouldn't look at crashes beforehand. Mohoric's knee pain before MSR wasn't showing during MSR either, so I try and look past those crashes and try and expect most riders at full force. And therefore, Pedersen with a sprint at the end, which is a very important factor here, a big sprint after a harder race. If he goes to a sprint in a group, he's likely the favorite for me in that group. And that's the intriguing part of him. Next to that, last year he was one of those riders that entered through Arenberg with the likes of Van der Poel and Colbrelli, and eventually ended up crashing into Rowe, or Rowe crashed him out on Arenberg, accidentally most likely. But in the end, it's showing that he was certainly one of the top 10 riders in that race, if not higher. I was looking at him for one of the favorites in those rainy conditions last year as well. I actually personally agree, but there's a lot of people that seem to, from my perspective, underrate Pedersen in that sense, saying that he shouldn't be favored, he should be near Van der Poel.
Let's think about it. One World Champs 2019. Mm-hmm. COVID completely fucked his 2020 season in World Champs. No Roubaix. 2021, then there's a whole 2021 with no Roubaix in April, and then he's going well in Roubaix, what he says is his best race, and Rowe crashes him out. So we've literally not seen Pete Pedersen able to complete a Roubaix, and we haven't seen him do a dry Roubaix. So that's why I think, and the clear comparison is Degenkolb 2015. Like, if you have the best sprint out of the strong men, out of the top classics guys, Roubaix is the one for you, because as long as you can stay in touch, which is easier said than done, on the cobbles, then it's actually hard to get rid of guys late in the race. And it's not wet, where MVP in the wet conditions last year was just insane handling-wise. We have dry conditions here. So it's just, like, if all these 5 guys go to the sprint in the Velodrome, Benji, Pedersen, I think, is the top guy to win out of that sprint. But I worry about what Jasper Stuyven thinks and that as well. Otherwise, MVP, I think correctly, is the favourite. He's won Flanders, third at MSR, won Dwars Tour, looks really good. That all makes sense. Wout, it's impossible to know, Benji. No one knows. I don't even think he could know what condition he could be in this weekend.
Yeah, I agree in that. They have held him out of Amstel, as we saw, and now he's announced to go to Roubaix. He's also announced to go to Liège-Bastogne-Liège by Harlen recently. The team has not yet confirmed that, so I'm hoping that he does, because I've been shouting for that for like years. But when it comes to Roubaix, it's difficult to have a feeling towards whether he's going to be in good form or not. Now, the words of Marijn Zeeman, the DS, were a rider like Wout can still play a role in supporting Christophe Laporte, Mike Teunissen, and Nathan van Hooydonk. Now, I have no clue whether I should believe that or not, but I compare that with the stuff when it comes to Van der Poel before Milano Sanremo. The fact that the Wout van Aert Strava stats are now hidden. Like, it's similar to the approach that Alpecin did with Van der Poel towards Milano Sanremo, and he was still good. So I just consider every rider in relatively good enough condition if they go to a race like Roubaix. It's not something you can show up for in a mild condition, in my personal opinion. So I'd say he's probably going to be quite all right from just that perspective of I don't believe anything a team says anymore.
If you're Rudolph, what do you tell MVDP? I think you still say we have to treat Wout van Aert like he's Wout van Aert. That's the only option, which is good for Jumbo because that opens up opportunities for them. Let's talk about the actual teams, though, of these favourites. Asgreen being the one who's not, let's be honest, Quickstep have had their worst classics campaign, including at Brabants, for a long, long time, and Amstel. They have Ballerini, Lampard, Steimler, Asgreen, Stibar, de Klerk, Seneschal. They are aging. Like Stibar's been really, really good at Roubaix for years and years and years. The wet conditions, and they had equipment issues last year. I think they ran tubeless or something. I can't
Yeah.
remember what they ran, and they literally all flatted like 3 times. So Lampard looked good. He was on MVDP's wheel with like 70 k's to go, and then they all flatted. So that's tough. If there was a race that suited them a bit more, it's this. I think the punchy style of the way the hills were done in the classics really hurt them. How do you think they'll play it, Benji? I've read all those names, really reputable classics guys. Are they going to do again what they did in Flanders, where they pretended like they were the top team and they were pacing after Asgreen had been half dropped on the previous climb? Are they going to do the old quick step way of flowing riders into attacks? I still think that's their best option because, like, Asgreen probably can't just drop Pedersen and MVDP on his own, and he's not beating both of them in a sprint.
I think so as well. And I think the goal of any team against the likes of an Alpecin-Deceuninck is to make sure they use their team strength to isolate Van der Poel during the race. And I think the way to do that is by trying to send people forward like Quickstep might do, for example. Like at the start of a race, in cobble races in the past, we'd have Tim de Klerk pacing in the peloton. I think last year he went into the breakaway, but I'm not sure about it in one of the classics. I'd say
He
that
did.
Tim
He
de
did go on
Klerk
the
would
break
be
last year, I think.
okay. I'd say that Tim de Klerk would indeed go in the breakaway again to prevent them from having to do anything in the peloton for the majority of the time in the race. And then when it comes to the cobbles coming up, I do expect them to roll attacks and try and get people forward in that way because that's how they can make sure that they put Alpecin under pressure and the other teams that they're up against. I think that they might have allies in that when it comes to other teams. We'll get to that in a bit, but I do expect this team to be better than previously because the troubles happened quite a bit ago in the team. Like, de Klerk came back from his heart issue and is gradually upping his form. Ballerini was back from his bronchitis, is gradually upping form. Lampard has complete focus on Roubaix since the start of the season because there's like a Belgian TV program. I think it's called Iedereen Beroemd or something, with a section about Lampard's preparation towards Roubaix. And it seems like that's really the race he is preparing for. And I think the same goes for Seneschal because Seneschal was talking last year all about wanting to focus completely on this race, Paris-Roubaix, last year, and it didn't really work out for him, quite certainly. And I think I just expect this team to be better. I think Stibar had a great result in the past at this race. I think the one that Van Avermaet won in 2018 is my...
He's come second twice.
Okay. I think I believe in Quickstep more at this moment in the preseason than in the other races.
I agree, but yeah, like Stibar, 36 years old. He's been off the pace at all the other classics, but this is the one that suits him best. But yeah, he can't win a sprint. They have to have an open race if they want to win. Because Benji already mentioned it, Van der Poel's team, no Dries de Bont, from what I can see on PCS. Jonas Rickart's got an issue with his leg. He's got like a dead leg, and he can't. They're trying to get to the bottom of it. He was good. Remember when MVDP flatted after Arenberg last year, Jonas
Yeah.
Rickart was the man that brought him back. No Philipsen, who was also strong last year in the wet conditions. He actually could have played a real role here. They have Guillaume van Kiersbroek, Senna Layton. I think van Kiersbroek's actually been okay as a domestique at this race in the past. Earlier, Gianni Vermeersch is good. Dillier came second before Vavmota and MVDP. It looks okay on paper, Benji, but when it's real crunch time, I don't really see any of these guys being able to help MVDP. If Seneschal attacks or Van Hooijdonk attacks?
Mm, I don't know. I agree. I agree in that, and I think there are still strong riders in that squad. Again, Johnny Vermeers, you mentioned him. Like that's the one lieutenant I see in that team
True,
that is
he's
going to
good.
make it towards the final of this race. And I think last year he had a mechanical or something very late in the race that made him not be in the final. But when it comes to the rest of the team, it's Julien Vermote seems like the kind of rider that rides at the front of the peloton in the initial part of this race. Senna Leisten, I don't expect too much from him in this race. Sylvain Dillier had that great result. You said it, but it's. I think the team will be able to support him relatively well. But when the race explodes, they're all gone except for Johnny Vermeers.
Yeah, and what they can do is, I guess, hold gap stable, and then MVDP will try and bridge on cobbled sections, but that still costs him something, and that's what I think the other teams have to do to try and work him over. Before we get to Jumbo, who I think should pursue a pretty similar strategy to Quickstep, Trek-Segafredo, Sturven, Darnul, big young Dutch guy, huge engine on that kid. Edward Turns, Kirsch, who's been very, very good, Kirsch in the classics so far. Hulgaard, the Norwegian who came from UNOX, and obviously Pedersen. I think, Benji, you have to put Sturven in complete prison for Pedersen here. I think, no, I don't really see much of a benefit in Sturven going up the road at any point. Because if he goes up the road and then Pedersen has an issue, well, that's not, you can't help him. Or if he gets dropped by MVDP or Wout or Asger on a cobbled section, well, that's not gonna, you can't help him up the road. And if they bridge to Sturven, that's not a good situation because he ain't winning the sprint. So they probably won't do it, but I think Sturven prison. And I think they should want. I think they should want that race, Benji, where literally it was like there was one year there was like 30-man group going into Carrefour de l'Arbre or something. They should want a huge group going to the peloton and an easy race and Pedersen bunch sprint.
I don't believe in an easy race and 30 men going into that Carrefour de l'Arbre section, knowing that Van der Poel is at the start of this race and he's going to hammer it on the sections between 70 and 50 kilometers to go in this race, like in Orchy or Orchy-les-Orchy, those sectors. But when I look at their team, I agree. At Gent-Wevelgem, they sent Stuyven forward. They allowed him to work with the breakaway to go for his chances in a group sprint where he was never going to get a top two. So that was a flawed tactic completely. And then I look at Roubaix and I see the potential of making the same mistake, having Stuyven in a group ahead, and then saying to Stuyven, okay, you can ride with, I don't know, Laporte, or let's say, with Kung he should ride. I think he can beat Kung in a sprint. Like, that's something I'm pretty clear about.
Kung will
But
drop him.
no, I don't believe that. I believe Kung is good, but I don't think it's going to be that easy to drop Stuyven either. But I agree that Mats Pedersen is the big one for that team, and I'd argue that they should indeed focus on Mats Pedersen because, like you said, Stuyven only wins if he sprints against a really shit sprinter at the end of the race or if he's solo. And that's a scenario I don't really see happening in this race.
I think Sturven loses a sprint to Kung in Roubaix. He would lose it. He lost to Dries van Gestel after he was a domestique for Sagan in Gent-Wevelgem. But anyway, that's what we think Trek should do. Jumbo-Visma is the big unknown, as we said. They have Affini Rosen, who's in the break last year, maybe. Mick van Dijk, the young Dutch talent. Nathan van Hooijdonk, who's been unreal this classic season. Ternesen, who's done well in top 10 Roubaix before. Laporte, who came sixth last year with a bike that was barely working. He had to brake with his foot. And of course, Wout van Aert. I think you have to let Laporte try, Benji, not just for him, because you don't know Wout's condition, which maybe it's great, maybe it's not, but I don't think you can put Laporte into any sort of prison. And I think they just should, what's the best way to beat MVDP? Put Wout in a seat and have Christophe attack, and then, in that 70k zone. So I think Laporte has to be allowed to attack. And like in Gent-Wevelgem, people don't want to mark him.
Yeah, that's true. And it's going to be intriguing to see whether Laporte has moved up on the ranking for the competitors when it comes to the riders that they mark. Like at Gent-Wevelgem, it's kind of different because people were probably focusing on a sprint, but in a race like Roubaix, they might mark him more. than again Wevelgem, in my opinion. But it's going to be intriguing whether the competition will mark Wout the most because of his palmarès, or we'll look at that COVID situation as okay, perhaps we should mark him less and focus on Laporte as well. It's difficult to guess that from the perspective of the competition as well, and I think that's something that the competition is going to struggle with, and that Jumbo-Visma might be able to exploit in this race. And the intriguing aspect there is that I don't think those riders are necessarily the only good riders on that team. We've seen a very good Nathan van Hooydonk recently, both at RVV where he went early, went late into the race, and then we looked at Amstel where he went into the attack as well. Perhaps, I don't know, perhaps it's one of those riders that could end up being quite far into the race, and I'm pretty hyped about Mick van Dijk after what I saw at RVV. I don't know how they'll play him out in that race specifically, but I just have the feeling that Mick van Dijk is a rider that, let's say Mick van Dijk gets in the breakaway. That's the kind of rider that I see surprising people in the way that Vermeers did last year. And those are intriguing aspects. And I think this is a stronger team than, for example, well, obviously stronger team than Alpecin, for example. But I'd say Jumbo is at least a top 3 team at this race.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the other teams we haven't mentioned yet is Ineos, who don't have like a top 5 favourite, but as a collective, they are a big contender for this race because of the depth and strength of their team. They will obviously want an open, aggressive race. They don't have well, Viviani's apparently down, but I don't really. They're not going to ride for Viviani, I don't think. They got Rowe, Viviani, Kwiatkowski, who just won Amstel, Ganna, Van Baarle, Turner, and Sheffield. Both of those last two, the absolute revelations of the classics so far, with Sheffield winning Brabants yesterday. I think they want an open race. Van Baarle always attacks early. They all have similar profiles in terms of big engines, particularly Ganna, Turner, and Sheffield. And do they surely got to try and get one of them in the break. Is Turner too? I think you can't let him in the break, Benji. If I'm the other teams, I don't let him in the break.
If Ben Turner is in the breakaway, I'm going to be quite surprised when it comes to the freedom they give Ineos in this race. And I'd be more likely to see a Filippo Ganna try and go in the breakaway.
Nah, they won't let him.
I think they might let Ganna in the breakaway. I
Really?
genuinely believe that is a possibility, because I don't think many people expect the world of Ganna here, despite the fact that we've seen him great on those Montalcino gravel sections, and we've been saying for years that he should be doing Roubaix. I just feel like I've been announcing or hyping it up, and now I'm like, okay, was I expecting too much? Do I still expect the same? I'm scared of what Ganna will do in this race because I really don't know. It's like something I've got no grasp on his ability of doing Roubaix here, and whether it's only the cobbles that he's going to be good at. Because, for example, at that Giro stage, he was doing it from the front of the peloton. Will his positioning in the group be good enough? Will his technique be good enough in cornering and so forth? His ability to maneuver around riders on the cobbles. I don't know what to expect from Filippo Ganna, but I do agree that the team is incredibly strong, and Van Baarle is one of the riders that I see top 5ing this race. And I'd argue that despite his performance at Brabant-Sepel, in which Magnus Sheffield did ride away in a bit of a fluke way, like they literally just kind of let him go and didn't jump on the wheel, but he was definitely strong enough to deliver it. And I'd argue that he still might be able to get in the breakaway.
Yeah, I think he could be letting the break. Turner, you don't want to let the break, but maybe it's a long distance compared to Brabant's. It's 260 Ks. I don't expect too much of Ganna, to be honest. He's 6th favourite at the bookies.
Wow.
But that's a surprise to me. Nah.
Breakaway? Like Philipsen last year?
That's a good point. Viviani's more who I would expect in there. You got to remember, though, they might not have a top favourite for this race, but Ineos were maybe having the correct tyre pressure in Moscon's tyres away from winning this last year. They always have been consistently good at this race. Stannard, Rowe, remember in 2016, Rowe launching Stannard into a sector after a crosswind section. They're going to do something. They're going to activate the race, and don't be surprised to see 2 Ineos in a group of 8 in the last 50 kilometres before or after Morzon-Pavel.
Then going on to another team that I'd argue has a pretty strong squad, knowing what we've seen from the other classics, is the likes of Bahrain Victorious. Fred Wright has been showing quite a bit this year as well. Mohoric, Hausler, Trotnik. I think Jonathan Milan is a bit of a Ganna situation. Very similar rider, but worse. Significantly worse, in my opinion. And as a consequence, I don't know what to expect from him either. I don't expect him to go extremely far, but I think the focus should just be on the four riders we mentioned, which is Wright, Mohoric, Hauser, and Trotnik. Trotnik has been amazing, is now rumored to go to Jumbo-Visma, according to our recent transfer. We can talk about that at some point in the future, because that's quite intriguing. But Hausler obviously destined to podium this race, inevitable. Like, he is the god, and therefore I support him completely. He's one of those riders that an entire season you can hear almost nothing from him, and then at Roubaix, he's likely to top 15.
So yeah, top 15, literally, I would be surprised if he wouldn't, frankly.
But should he? Because
I don't
should
like
he not
Tratnik for it.
domestique?
I don't like Tratnik for it.
Okay.
Tratnik's a puncher. He's good on the punchy hills. Fred Wright, absolute animal. If Fred Wright tops fives this, don't be surprised. If he's in the Velodrome with some favourites, don't be surprised. Remember on the Velodrome, the kid is, again, maybe he's actually a bit like Tratnik too. He prefers the punch rather than the cobbles. I don't know. This is such a different race. But Bahrain, obviously, they've won Milano-San Remo. You just got to not be surprised if they're on the podium of another monument. Lotto Soudal, Campenaerts seems to be at the end of his performance peak. Vermeersch came second last year, should have won last year, actually. If he'd gone a little bit later, I think he would have won comfortably. He won't be allowed in the break again. It was a wet edition. I think Vermeersch can top 10. I don't think he makes the group of favourites. What's the sentiment around Vermeersch, Benji? Fluke, Dillier, Pollitt, or legit guy for Roubaix for a decade to come?
I think he's a legit guy that might be strong for the next decade, but I don't necessarily see him as like the last top 8 material yet. I see him as top 20 should be doable for Florian Vermeersch, and it also gave him the benefit that he was in the breakaway last year. Let's not underrate that. Can he go in the breakaway again? I'd argue yes. And I base that on the fact that his season so far this year has not been amazing. And I think that's why I believe that he should get in the breakaway again, try that again, and he might be able to copy paste that same performance and might be able to top 10 again in the same formation, perhaps even closer. You don't know what the situation in the race will behold. I think the breakaway has less chance of getting as far on a dry race than on a rainy race, but I still think that the breakaway in Roubaix has always shown to be able to get at least one rider into the last spot of the race. And he should try again. As simple as that. Gilbert. Oh, ooh, that's intriguing. It depends on whether he can go there. I think that's always an opportunity for riders to go. We see that in dry Roubaix, it's often like the peloton just kind of stops a bit after Arenberg. And that's opportunities for someone like Vermeersch to go, like you just mentioned. And I don't know, he could also win the early breakaway. Like, he could try both. If one fails, try the other.
I think if he goes early break, people are like, nah, not a big fan of that, buddy. Yeah. But if he goes post Arenberg, I think some teams will be like, oh, he's not that good, is he? And I think he might get some license. Otherwise, the most underrated team who have had a shocking season so far for various reasons, sickness, injuries, and other things, Israel Premier Tech, they did not even participate at Tour of Flanders, which I don't know if Van Marke was actually fit. He's obviously been on the podium of Roubaix, lost the sprint to Cancellara in 2013. He's been fourth 3 times. This is maybe his best race. I don't know why they didn't call up like me, you, and a few guys from the development team to at least pair with him at Flanders for some points. He's here, obviously, but the most underrated rider in this race, his odds were like 750 yesterday, is Guillaume Bovin. 3 riders made G1 from the peloton last year. Mathieu van der Poel, Sonny Colbrelli, and Guillaume Bovin was there before he got crashed out. They caught up to Vermeersch and Moscon. He could be one of these guys who Roubaix is his thing. Maybe he's just a swimmer. Like, he's 32 years old. He came 9th last year despite that crash. He only joined World Tour after being in the cycling academy team. Oh, he's always been on Israel. I don't know. I just think he's hugely underrated. To make G1 last year, that is special, and just don't be surprised if he's there as well. I think.
Didn't he crash?
Yeah,
I
he
think
got
he
crashed.
crashed at the front group.
He
Yeah.
got crashed out. Yeah, yeah. Ula's there with Hollenstein Bernemans. I'm just saying that's my big note of the day on Premier Tech. Sepp Benji, what do you want from Sepp? He's
I
crashing,
don't
right?
expect anything from Sepp. He's likely going to puncture with like 3 cobble sections to go. If he's at the front, God will decide. The cycling gods will decide he's not going to win today. So I expect that at least. Like we haven't seen much from Sepp this year either, and yes, it's been partially due to the fact that Israel has been tormented with sickness throughout the year. I agree that I expect perhaps a fluke from Boivin again. He was not only 9th at Roubaix last year, but 17th at Worlds in Flanders. So that might perhaps show that it's not necessarily the rain alone that did it, because it was not raining on Worlds in Flanders, for example. I think that I think they should just try and send riders in the breakaway like a Boivin, because even if it is the lead group towards the end, I have a hard time believing that a Boivin can follow the accelerations of the likes of a Van der Poel and so forth on cobble sections. And therefore, trying to slip away in between cobble sections seems to be the way to go for this team when it comes to their riders. But I'm not going to lie, I'm not that bullish on Israel Premier Tech this year.
All right, Benji said it. I think he's probably right. I'm going to whip through some of the big outsiders, and Benji can chime in on the ones he thinks has a real chance. Total will be going for Turgis. I'm not sure if Sagan's even participating, but his forms looked awful. As does Citroën have Naesen and Van Avermaet. Van Avermaet's actually been okay. He's obviously won this race in 2017. FDJ is Kung and Aski, EF, Langerfeld, Bissiger, who actually was in the break last year, Kukalera, who's been in the move in 2016, I think, with Bonen, UAE Trentin, Arkea Zwift, Intermarché, Christoph Kleis, Cofidis Valais, Bora Hala Pollitt, second in 2018, DSM, Jon, he's not Jon, it's Zagiro, John Degenkolb, I don't know why I made him Basque. Anyone pique your interest there, Benji? I think Christoph's a little overrated for this.
Alexander Kristoff?
Yeah, he's actually never done well at Roubaix. He's always been a Flanders man.
Yep. I think I mentioned on a podcast or a few podcasts ago that in 2019 he had some trouble, or was it last year he had some trouble, one of the two, with choosing tubeless tires, and it didn't really go well towards the race there. But I agree that this race has never been his best race. He's always been kind of cursed in this race, whether it's just being in bad form or whether it's having bad luck when it comes to punctures or crashes and so forth. I do believe that this might be the opportunity to change that. His form in Scheldeprijs was great. On RVV, he was one of the top 8 riders, or one of the first riders actually, over the Koppenberg, which is quite insane in my opinion for Alexander Kristoff. And I'm going to say he's going to break the curse. I believe in Alexander Kristoff. He's 34. This is the year to do it. He's going to top 10 this race for the second time in his career, and it's going to be a 7th spot.
7th spot? Not bad, okay. Trentin, he had to work for Pog at RVV. That ended up being the right thing. Maybe this is his big chance to ride for himself. Kung has been... FDJ, I roasted FDJ. I did. Or maybe Demar in their preview, or whenever I did it. I have to say they've been very, very strong in the classics. Demar has even had good shape. Kung, if he was to win a race, this would be the one. He obviously has to go solo. Kung's just got to be a bit more of a mongrel, Benji. I reckon if I just talk to him for 10 minutes and be like, Stefan, the world is a deep, dark place. These people in the race are not your friends. Do not help them. He'd be winning everything.
Yeah,
so I hope
agree
to
in that.
see. If he's pulling with MVP in the wheel, chasing like Laporte or Van Aert or Sturven, I'll fight him personally.
Yeah, you should. And I wanna actually insult you for a second, because you forgot about the myth, the man, the legend, Taco. And when talking about Intermarché, because you mentioned a lot about Christoph and you spoke very little about Taco van der Hoorn. I believe Taco van der Hoorn could be the man that stays into the final from the early breakaway.
You reckon he's Heyman? Like he's the Os Heyman gets in deep? I see that. I can't wait to see him with his 32 centimeter bars on the cobbles. Try and navigate. Imagine that in the wet. All right. they were the outsiders. That's Roubaix. Now time for our predictions. I've got my deep outsiders as well as my top favourite for who I think wins the race. I think Christophe Laporte wins, either in a sprint or solo. I think he wins. And yeah, because MVP will mark, of course, Wout van Aert. And my big outsider is Darnoul.
Okay, that's intriguing. I was expecting you to talk more about the likes of O'Connor Swift. Like,
Nah, Swift's he's been really good at, remember that gravel race, Classica Hyena, or whatever it was. I
yeah,
think he likes a little bit of a hill here and there. And no, I'm not saying he can't top 15, of course, but Darnoul is Vermeersch 2.0 from the early break, in my view.
okay, I see that. I certainly see that. When it comes to my favorites slash outsiders for this race, I think Denmark will come out on top. It's either Asgreen or Mats Pedersen. I haven't figured out who of the two. If it comes down to a sprint in a group, it's going to be Pedersen. But I said at the start of the year that Casper Asgreen was my favorite for Roubaix. I think his form is growing quite nicely. And we saw that by his top 10 at Amstel as well. I was expecting a good result at Amstel. He did show that good result, in my opinion. He was in that group that Kwiatkowski eventually rode away from and was in that final. I believe Asgreen is the kind of rider that fits on a race like this. And the earlier it opens up, I think the better it is for Asgreen, because he's one of those riders that he really likes an attrition race. And the harder it is for the competition, the better he becomes compared to them, because he can truck on for like hundreds of kilometers continuously. How he won E3 last year was attacking with 70k to go, eventually getting caught and going again. And that's not something a lot of riders can do. And that's something I see happening with Quickstep if they try and use their outnumbering on other riders, he might have an opportunity to try something and ride away. But the issue for him is that I think that Pedersen might be able to follow, and that's why I'm not sure who of the two I'd pick. So I'm going to go with Asgreen solely for the fact that Pedersen fell in Circuit Start, and I'm going to regret it because Pedersen will likely win.
Another name I want to throw out there is Olivier Legac. He's actually really strong on Wevelgem. I think if he gets in the early break, he can go deep into this race. Did you have a 500-1 outsider like I did, Benji?
Yeah, I believe that. By the way, I just want to talk about the fact that when it comes to Bingle, I'm slightly disappointed that Bas Titema is not on the starting list. It's his dream race. At the start of the videos, his dad showed up and said, if there's one race that he dreams of winning, it's Paris-Roubaix. Very high bar for Bas Titema. But regardless of his level at the moment, it's such an exposure thing that he should 100% be in that team for marketing, for the sponsors. Belgium and Netherlands so invested in this rider and his social media stuff. He might not be on the level of the other riders on the team in that race. I don't know. But his exposure is more than every other rider combined. Do I think he's going to win? No. Why did I say this during the outsider thing? Because I just saw that shirt of the team and I thought, okay, let's talk about it. But when it comes to my actual outsider, I am going to say that the outsider to win Paris-Roubaix is going to be... Why am I so bad at this shit? Like,
you already
I'm
said
always
it,
bad.
Hausler.
Nah, he's not an outsider. He's a favorite, my friend.
He's an
Don't call him an outsider. He's the legend
bookies.
himself. I think the outsider we are looking at is, I believe in Taco van der Hoorn early breakaway stuff.
That's a fair call. I like that. And of course, like Ben Turner, his odds have plummeted down. He's 34-1 now. So he used to be an outsider, not anymore. Sheffield probably, he's 34s too. But yeah, that's our men's Paris-Roubaix preview. I took Laporte, Benji took Asgreen, and we have a few favourites like Darnoul and who'd you just pick?
I forgot. Taco?
Yeah, Taco as well. All right. Any last thoughts, Benji?
Very much looking forward to it. Same thoughts. I want to see the race dynamics on Saturday and Sunday to see whether it plays out similarly to what we expect. And I just hope that we've got a very good race. I want it to open up early, but I don't want the race to be decided early. I want to have tension until the last moment, kind of like, what was it, Roubaix 2016? The one that Bonin got second and got destroyed by that villainous character called Matthew Heyman. That was a very good Roubaix because the tension was there. The last few kilometers were probably the most stressful last few kilometers of my entire life of watching cycling. And I want it to happen in both the men's race and the women's race. I want entertainment and stuff around that. I would find it funny if that DSM management system for their tires fails for a few riders, because that would be, it would be good content. But on the other end, if it works and it's innovative, that would be pretty cool as well. But all in all, we're looking forward to this weekend. I certainly am, and I hope we've got some good racing that we all can enjoy.
Matthew Heyman, great day in Australian history. Sad day for Belgium. I relive it every week before Roubaix. Heyman prepared on Zwift actually before Roubaix. That's a natural sponsor plug, the likes of which you'll never see. Thanks as always for listening to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast presented by Zwift. We'll see you with the recap of Roubaix on Femme avec Zwift on Saturday and the men's on Sunday. Until then, ciao.